The dumbest wars in history. That should never have happened. A war started because of a bucket. A different one started because of a pig. One ear of a pig. And the absolute crown jewel of human stupidity? A war that lasted 335 years with 0 battles, 0 casualties, and nobody noticed it was still happening for 3 centuries. 10 wars. All real. All preventable. All started by people who genuinely had better options and chose this. War, historically, didn't need a good reason. It needed an excuse, and sometimes that excuse was embarrassing, even by the standards of the people starting it. These 10 conflicts are proof. Number 10. The War of the Bucket. Italy, 1325. In 1325, soldiers from the city of Modena raided a well in Bologna and stole a bucket. An oak bucket, used to carry water. Bologna demanded it back. Modena said no. Bologna declared war. This was not a small local scuffle. The resulting conflict, the Battle of Zappolino, involved roughly 30,000 soldiers and became one of the largest battles in medieval Italian history. 2 city-states mobilized armies, fielded cavalry, suffered thousands of casualties, and restructured regional politics for decades. Over a bucket. The absurd detail that makes this even better. Modena won. They kept the bucket. And to this day, that exact bucket, or what's claimed to be it, is displayed in the Cathedral of Modena as a trophy. They put it in a church. The bucket has a permanent home in a religious building because their ancestors were too stubborn to return a piece of wooden kitchenware. The darkly comedic punchline: historians believe the bucket was symbolic, that real political tensions existed between the 2 cities, and the bucket was just the spark, which somehow makes it worse. Tens of thousands of men died, and a bucket got cathedral status because 2 governments needed an excuse to do something they could have resolved at a table. Coming up, number 9 is a war that started with 1 man, 1 pig, and the most awkward diplomatic conversation in North American history. Number 9. The Pig War. USA versus Britain, 1859. In 1859, an American farmer named Lyman Cutler was living on San Juan Island, a disputed territory claimed by both the United States and Britain. One morning, he found a large black pig digging up his garden. He shot it. The pig belonged to the Hudson's Bay Company, a British entity. British authorities threatened to arrest Cutler. American settlers requested military protection. The U.S. Army sent troops. Britain sent warships. At peak tension, 461 American soldiers with 14 cannons faced off against 5 British warships carrying 70 guns and 2,140 men. Both sides were pointed directly at each other over 1 dead pig on a small island neither country had clearly defined jurisdiction over. Here is the most perfectly absurd detail in this story. The pig cost $10. 10 American dollars. Lyman Cutler offered to pay for it. The British declined the offer and escalated instead. 2 of the world's most powerful militaries positioned for open warfare rather than accepting $10 for a pig. The ending is somehow the most satisfying in this entire list. American General Winfield Scott and British Rear Admiral Robert Baines, 2 grown adults with actual authority, met, looked at the situation, and agreed it was insane. They negotiated a joint military occupation of the island. Both sides stood down. Nobody fired a shot. The only casualty of the pig war was the pig, and honestly, it had it coming. Number 8. The Football War. El Salvador versus Honduras, 1969. In June 1969, El Salvador and Honduras played each other in a series of World Cup qualifying matches. The games were intense, the crowds were hostile, and riots broke out in the stands. 4 days after the final match, El Salvador invaded Honduras. Fighter planes bombed Honduran airports. Ground troops crossed the border. A full war was underway. The press immediately called it the Football War, and the name stuck, which is exactly the problem, because the football matches didn't cause the war. They were the spark dropped into a room already full of gas. Tens of thousands of Salvadoran migrants in Honduras had been facing legal pressure, land disputes, and violence for years. The two governments had unresolved border tensions. The football matches just gave everyone permission to explode. The chillingly absurd detail: the war lasted exactly 100 hours before the Organization of American States brokered a ceasefire. Over 900 people died, most of them civilians, in a conflict that started because two countries couldn't stop themselves from turning a sporting rivalry into a geopolitical emergency. The peace treaty wasn't signed until 1980, 11 years after the final whistle. The football, for the record, had nothing to do with any of it. The football was just there. Number 7. The Anglo-Zanzibar War. 1896. 38 minutes. On August 27, 1896, at 9:02 a.m., British warships opened fire on the palace of Sultan Khalid bin Bargash, who had seized power in Zanzibar without British approval. By 9:40 a.m., it was over. 38 minutes, the shortest war in recorded history. The Sultan had approximately 2,800 defenders, a few artillery pieces, a royal yacht, and a palace. The British had 5 warships. The outcome was, statistically speaking, not suspenseful. Here's where it gets almost comical. British officials had literally sent a diplomatic message the day before, stating the exact terms under which war could be avoided, along with a deadline. The Sultan received the message, read it, and chose to keep his throne anyway. He apparently believed other powers would intervene on his behalf. They did not. The absurd, almost beautiful detail: Khalid bin Bargash fled to the German consulate while his palace was still burning. He lived in exile for years, eventually died peacefully, and was outlived by the descendants of the British officials who had removed him. The British spent more time writing the diplomatic ultimatum than the war lasted. In terms of pure return on logistical investment, the Anglo-Zanzibar War is the most efficient military operation in history, which is either impressive or deeply troubling, depending on how you look at it. Number 6. The War of the Stray Dog. Greece versus Bulgaria, 1925. In October 1925, a Greek soldier chased his runaway dog across the Bulgarian border near Petrich. Bulgarian border guards shot him. Greece, outraged, invaded Bulgaria. Within days, Greek forces had occupied Bulgarian territory. Bulgaria appealed to the League of Nations, the international peacekeeping body established specifically to prevent exactly this kind of situation. The League convened. They reviewed the case, and then, in one of the League of Nations' rare successful interventions, they ordered Greece to pay Bulgaria 45,000 British pounds in reparations and withdraw immediately. Greece complied. The troops went home. The crisis lasted under 2 weeks. The staggering detail: the League of Nations actually worked here. An international body resolved an armed conflict through diplomacy in under a fortnight, ordered a larger country to compensate a smaller one, and achieved compliance without further violence. This is considered one of the few genuine successes of the League of Nations before it spectacularly failed to prevent World War II. The dog, for what it's worth, was not found. The dog just kept going. The dog is still out there somewhere, philosophically speaking, completely unbothered. Number 5. The War of Jenkins' Ear. Britain versus Spain, 1739. In 1731, a British sea captain named Robert Jenkins had his ear cut off by a Spanish Coast Guard officer who boarded his ship in the Caribbean. Jenkins kept the ear in a jar. 8 years later, 8 years, Jenkins brought the ear to the British Parliament and displayed it during a hearing about Spanish harassment of British merchants. Parliament erupted. The public erupted. The newspapers named it the outrage. Britain declared war on Spain. A preserved ear in a jar, 8 years old, triggered an international war. The conflict lasted 9 years, expanded into the larger War of the Austrian Succession, involved most of Europe's major powers, and ended with essentially no territorial changes for either Britain or Spain. Tens of thousands died. Entire naval campaigns were launched and lost. The staggering absurd detail. Historians strongly suspect the ear story was either exaggerated or partially fabricated as political theater. That Jenkins' ear was less a genuine grievance and more a convenient piece of propaganda used by British politicians who wanted war for economic reasons and needed a story that would outrage the public. If true, that means the War of Jenkins' ear wasn't started by an ear at all. It was started by politicians who used an ear to start a war they'd already decided to fight. The ear was just the marketing, which is somehow even dumber. Number 4. The Battle of Caransebeș, Austria, 1788. This one isn't technically a war. It's a single catastrophic military incident that is so magnificently stupid it deserves its own entry. In 1788, the Austrian Habsburg army, a force of around 100,000 soldiers speaking at least 10 different languages, made camp near the town of Caransebeș in modern-day Romania. Some cavalry soldiers crossed the river ahead of the main camp, found local merchants selling schnapps, and started drinking. When the infantry arrived and demanded schnapps, the cavalry refused to share. An argument broke out. Shots were fired. In the dark, in a multilingual army with no unified communication system, soldiers started shouting, "Turci! Turci! Turks! Turks!" warning of an enemy attack. The army panicked. Units that hadn't heard the original shots assumed the Turks had arrived. They opened fire on each other. Cavalry units fleeing the chaos trampled infantry units who had no idea what was happening. Officers trying to restore order shouted commands that were misheard or ignored. The army fought itself through the night. By morning, between 10,000 and 40,000 Austrian casualties. The Ottoman army, the actual enemy, arrived 2 days later to find the Austrian camp in ruins and took the town of Caransebeș without significant resistance. The Turks didn't beat the Austrian army. The Austrian army beat the Austrian army, then left the field, and the Turks just walked in. The schnapps merchant, presumably, had a very interesting story to tell his grandchildren. Number 3. The 335-Year War. Netherlands versus the Isles of Scilly, 1651 to 1986. In 1651, during the English Civil War, the Dutch Navy arrived at the Isles of Scilly, a tiny archipelago off the southwest tip of England, to demand reparations for ships damaged by Royalist forces sheltering there. The Royalists refused. The Dutch declared war. Then the Royalists were driven out. The Dutch had no one to fight. The war simply was never formally ended. No peace treaty was signed. The Netherlands and the Isles of Scilly, a group of islands with a current population of around 2,200 people, remained technically at war. For 335 years, no battles, no casualties, no diplomatic incident, just a war that existed on paper, forgotten by everyone, while the world went through the Industrial Revolution, 2 world wars, the moon landing, and the invention of the Internet. The jaw-dropping detail: in 1985, a historian named Roy Duncan actually wrote to the Dutch embassy in London to ask whether the war was real. The Dutch embassy confirmed it was. The Dutch ambassador then traveled to the Isles of Scilly, signed a peace treaty, and joked that it must have been frightening to have lived under the threat of Dutch invasion for 3 centuries. The Isles of Scilly reportedly took the news calmly. When you've technically been at war with the Netherlands since 1651 and didn't know it, the peace treaty is probably more of an interesting fact than a relief. Number 2. Hiroo Onoda's War, Philippines, 1945 to 1974. In 1945, World War II ended. Japan surrendered. Soldiers around the world received orders to stand down. Hiroo Onoda did not get the memo. Literally. Onoda was a Japanese intelligence officer stationed in the Philippines. When the war ended, leaflets were dropped over his jungle location announcing the surrender. Onoda concluded they were enemy propaganda. His commanding officer had given him clear orders: hold position, conduct guerrilla activities, never surrender. He followed those orders for 29 years. Until 1974, Onoda continued conducting guerrilla activities in the Philippine jungle, raiding villages, destroying crops, engaging in firefights with Philippine police and military. He killed at least 30 people after the war was officially over. He survived multiple search parties. He outlasted several attempts to contact him. The extraordinary detail, the only thing that finally convinced Onoda to stop, was his original commanding officer, Yoshimi Taniguchi, by then an elderly bookseller in Japan, traveling to the Philippines in person, finding Onoda in the jungle, and personally giving him the order to stand down. Onoda emerged from the jungle in his original uniform, with his original rifle still in working order, 29 years after the war ended. The Philippine government pardoned him. Japan received him as a hero. He later opened a nature school for children. He was, by all accounts, absolutely sincere. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't lost. He was doing his job for 29 years, in a war that had ended before most of his eventual victims were born. Number 1. The Russo-Japanese War's opening. 1904. On the night of February 8, 1904, Japan launched a surprise torpedo attack on the Russian fleet at Port Arthur in Manchuria, beginning the Russo-Japanese War without a formal declaration of war. The attack was successful. The Russian fleet was crippled. But here's the detail that makes this number 1. Russia had been receiving intelligence warnings about Japanese military mobilization for weeks. Tsar Nicholas II had received reports, cables, assessments. His military advisors had flagged the threat, and the Tsar had repeatedly dismissed them, partly because he considered Japan a lesser power, partly because he wanted the war for domestic political reasons, and partly because his personal assessment was that Japan would never actually attack. Japan attacked. Russia lost the war. The humiliation of losing to Japan, the first time in the modern era that a European power had been defeated by an Asian nation, contributed directly to the revolutionary pressures that destabilized the Romanov dynasty. The 1905 revolution followed immediately. The chain of events that led to 1917 begins here. The staggering detail: if Tsar Nicholas II had taken the intelligence seriously, the Russo-Japanese War might not have happened. The 1905 revolution might not have happened. The circumstances that radicalized Russian politics and created the conditions for 1917 might have played out completely differently. One ignored cable. One miscalculation about another country's willingness to act. A chain of consequences that historians trace directly to the Russian Revolution and everything that followed. The dumbest wars in history aren't just dumb. Sometimes they're the ones that change everything. Outro: 10 wars. A bucket, a pig, a dog, an ear in a jar, a schnapps vendor, 335 years of forgotten paperwork, and one man alone in a jungle for 3 decades. Every single one of these had a moment, a specific, documented moment, where someone could have said, "Wait, let's not." Most of them didn't. Like if any of these made you want to flip a table. Subscribe. Next week, the dumbest battles within wars, commanders who lost on purpose, soldiers who fought on the wrong side, one general who won a war by accident. Comment? Bucket or pig? Which one is the most embarrassing? Genuinely cannot decide.